Gracious God, we celebrate you on this day for the wonderful privilege, the joy of being able to celebrate your great trumpeter, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We pray now that as we are gathered in community, that you would speak life in terms of what it means to truly be and become the beloved community. We thank you for the many faces that we've had the privilege to meet, and we thank you for the expectation of that which is to come. So we celebrate you now. Amen. Amen. Let me say from the outset, it is a joy and a humbling privilege to be here. As Dr. James and Dr. Carter have mentioned, I have grown up in this program. It's been some years since I've last been here at Headquarters Plaza and sharing in this celebration, about 14, 15 years now. But it's good to see familiar faces who look practically the same. The last time I was here, I was a half an inch shorter. I had more hair on my head and less hair on my face. And I think I was a shade thinner. Those were good years. Those were good years, but God has kept us through. To all the elected officials, to program participants, to Dr. Carter, to the clergy, and to all God's people assembled here. I believe it was Simon Peter who said it best, it's good to be here. Amen. It is indeed good to be here. And I have to, of course, thank the Observance Committee for thinking enough of this young preacher to bring me back home. I don't get the opportunity to come back to New Jersey often, but when I do, and I avoid snow, it's always a good thing. So I am grateful. Finally, I have to acknowledge Dr. Jameson. When I was a kid, and very few people know this, my ministry is centered around social gospel, social justice, and it was this program, an exposure to the Interfaith Breakfast and the events that we would have at the Calvary Church that really planted the seeds for my desire to carry out what Dr. King has mandated for our people. And Dr. Jameson used to bring me everywhere, to the National Democratic Convention and the Stand Up for Children March in Washington. And I am grateful for her. I remember everything vividly and everything clearly. And when I got the phone call, and I know her well enough to know that when I hear the words, you know what would be nice? That's when I know I'm about to get into something deep. But I am grateful that she thought enough of me to extend this invitation. I was a young boy when I first spoke some words here, and I'm still a young man, and I'm going to hold on to that as long as I can. When I was told about the theme, preparing a way for the beloved community, strangely enough, I thought of a purchasing decision I made not too long ago. I decided to invest in an iPhone. Needed a new phone. My old phone was giving me trouble, and I had a discount and an upgrade available from my service provider, so I went ahead and made that purchase. I already owned an iPad and an iPod, so it just seemed natural that I would in fact have an iPhone. And as I sat at my desk during a time at work and I was finagling with my devices, I observed some things. At first, each of these devices were designed differently. They looked similar, they performed similar functions, but they were different. Each of these devices were individualistic in nature. Everything pointed towards the eye and the things that the individual had at his or her disposal. As a matter of fact, I believe it was Steve Jobs who, when they unveiled the iMac in 1998, who said that the eye represented the intellect, information, instruction, and inspiration for the individual. But it was not until I set up my iPhone and I synced all my devices together that I discovered the truth and the intention of the Creator that each of these devices individually were powerful enough to do some incredible things, but it was not until they were in sync or placed in community with one another that those that used them were able to utilize their full and vast potential. And in a sense, I believe that's what King saw as he built upon Josiah Royce's concept of the beloved community. We have been privileged to witness and experience the power of the individual in our daily walks and everything we do. But until we learn how to operate along each other as our Creator intended, we will never experience our fully realized potential. It is only when we operate within the confines of community that we are able to move from a static place of being to a significant place of becoming all that God has intended for us to be. So here we are, January of 2014, preparing yet again the way for the beloved community. In a sense, we have been preparing for this community since Mahalia urged Martin on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to share with America this dream that he had. We have been preparing for this community for quite some time. Yet, although we anticipated and we are working towards it, it has not yet come to pass. So I ask myself the question, how do we truly prepare the way for the beloved community in 2014? And it begins by participating in the liberation of others. Who we are in the here and now was no overnight sensation. We were not always seeing ourselves in positions of power and prestige like the White House or Congress. We cannot always have the flexibility and the freedom of choice in terms of our education and our futures. There was a time when those who preceded us in humanity's movement were found in bondage, packed into ships like sardines in a can, shipped over as strangers in a strange land, families broken up, brutally whipped, overworked, and always under the threat of death. Yet we made it through. Not of ourselves, not by pulling our own bootstraps up, but we experienced the hand of God extended to our hand, and were led through those dark and desolate times in America's history. We heard about God's ability to liberate the beloved. We read about it manifesting in the life of that nomadic tribe of people known as the Hebrews. But it was not until we made our own personal cry for deliverance, placed our trust in our Creator and the tools that God had placed at our disposal, that our personal liberation began to occur. It did not begin and end with one individual. Our ancestors had the nerve to push us through, guiding us through with effectual, fervent prayers from the righteous source, and giving themselves on the front line, sitting at lunch counters so we may stand tall, being dressed down so we can dress up, taking menial jobs so we can make major moves, all for our own liberation. But here's the truth of the matter. In 2014, although we have, for the most part, been liberated from physical bondage in America, there are still some other issues within our immediate community that we are in bondage to. Home foreclosures due to rising costs centered at flushing out particular communities. We call that bondage. Disparity in the socio-economic and gender roles that limit the ability for one to move up because the glass ceiling has been cemented over. Bondage. Disconnect between adults and children due to broken homes and broken family systems. Bondage. Prison systems that cultivate no rehabilitation or rebuilding, only perpetuating a new form of systematic slavery that releases prisoners that have no options with the expectation that their release is merely a temporary vacation. We have experienced bondage in the here and now. But you and I have experienced our physical liberation. The fact that we are here in this room today stands true today. But now it becomes the responsibility of the liberated to aid in the freedom of those who are held captive by what King calls the triple evils of other than what they know. I can only speak from what I know, what I've been exposed to. Therefore, if I invest in books and expose my youth, my young adults and adults to art and culture and things outside of their immediate community, they may feel inspired and motivated to take up wings and take flight. We also must express them to our own personal testimonies, our stories of liberation. James Cone, proponent of Black liberation theology, affirms that our willingness to overcome is rooted in the person of Jesus Christ, who as God in the flesh experienced hardships like we did and overcame them. So when we cried out to the Lord for deliverance and our prayers are answered, they are done from a place of knowing and experiencing what we did. So since God participated in our liberation, it becomes a token of gratitude and obligation to participate in the liberation of those in captivity. Demonstrating that the same God who delivered the Hebrews, the same God who orchestrates miracles in our daily living, that same God who moved through boycotts and marches, through murders and speeches of freedom rides in the past, is the same God who is able to move in our broken situations in the here and now. It is difficult to have the expectation, however, of personal liberation from those held captive if they don't have some practical application. That means sharing our stories, sharing our testimonies. That's why King shared his testimony within the Mason Temple, April the 3rd, 1968, of being stabbed in New York. He shared that if he had merely sneezed, that the blade would have pierced his aorta and he would have been finished. He recounted the story of a young lady from White Plains, New York, who wrote a letter and said, "Dr. King, I'm so happy that you did not sneeze." And King utilized that moment of celebration to inform those who were still in captivity that the same God who moved through him down through the ages is the same God who is able to move through us. We begin by participating in the liberation of others. But that's not enough. We must be proactive. Become proactive in legitimizing our obligations. It's not enough to simply vocalize what the issues are. We know what the issues are. There must be some conversation, some action and conversation with the words we speak. We can look around Morris County. We know the issues that have been prevalent down through the years. The issues have not changed. As a matter of fact, you and I can argue that the issues have become more and more intense over time. We know what the issues are. However, knowing our obligation as a community, as an individual, as an organization is no good unless we are willing to place some physical movement to meet those obligations. One of the things that we celebrate about the civil rights movement in America is that we witness a track record of placing action in conversation. Disparity in education. The NAACP argued their case, Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, and they won. Segregation on interstate travel. We didn't simply talk about it, but King and Edie Nixon, Joanne Robinson, and others mobilized into marches and freedom rides that utilized movement in order to make a statement. Unfair treatment and profiling in places of commerce. We did not simply complain, but we boycott and patronized others until there was fair treatment held by all. We were proactive in making our obligation legitimate in the world, in so much that it could not be ignored. And now that same desire and drive is needed in 2014, especially as it relates to our young people. It does. Kids are joining gangs in order to find some sense of acceptance and belonging, but let's not simply complain about it, but let's build our young people up in character instead of tearing them down in criticism. It is incumbent for us to rethink and recommit to the village model where we engage our young people in love and support as opposed to turning aside and proclaiming that's issues with academics and identities, we must create programs that give our young people safe space to be just that, young people. Otherwise, the streets are going to claim them for themselves. Programs are essential for progress, but programs cannot work without the participation of persons who know better and want to see better. Instead of pushing them to what we want them to be or living vicariously through them, we need to get to know them in order to witness what their gifts are, push them to utilize those gifts so that when they reach our age, they will have passion, they will have a fervor, and the desire to make a difference. We've all heard the phrase before, talk is cheap. So let us move from cheap counterfeit talking to concrete certified walking. 1966, I believe it was the Four Tops that penned the words, now if you feel that you can't go on and all your hope is gone. Y'all know this song. Love is filled with such confusion. Happiness is just an illusion. And the world is tumbling down. Darling, reach out. And then it goes into the refrain, I'll be there to love and shelter you. I'll be there. I'll always see you through. And although this song is speaking of a romantic love, it is yet applicable to the base of the beloved community, which is agape love. I'll be there for my neighbor to have lend a helping hand. I'll be there for my young people by showing up and participating in school board meetings and PTA meetings. I'll be there when they reach out. We ought to be there. An obligation from those who are liberated to be there and to love those who are in captivity so they may in turn turn around and operate and orchestrate the liberation of others. But finally, we must be able and willing in order to make way for the beloved community to pass down a legacy of liberation. By no means should we expect the beloved community to come to pass tomorrow morning. It's a journey that America must take. This is not going to be an easy journey. It has not been an easy journey thus far. Nor will it be a journey devoid of criticism and conflict. But the journey must go on. Now, this is not to suggest that we operate in small measures and occasionally taking small breaks and lauding small successes. The danger of doing so is that oftentimes we will deem the penultimate accomplishment as the ultimate, and the overarching mission falls by the wayside. But this march towards love and reconciliation must be taught to our children, and our children's children, and our children's children's children. And they must continue to push this message until we reach that glorious promised land. About 2 years ago, in the capacity of teaching associate for civil rights activist Dr. Bernard Lafayette, we took our class on a civil rights tour from Selma to Birmingham, Greenwood, Mississippi to Jackson to Nashville, Tennessee. We rode on buses and we shared stories from those who were actively on the front line for the movement. Many of the occupants of this ride were freedom riders. Individuals who challenged Jim Crow segregation and interstate travel. They talked about how they traveled the highways and the byways, taking on significant risks, placing their lives in danger to enrich the lives of the overarching community, even when they were treated unfairly in the eyes of society. They heard down through the ages about how God liberated God's children out of love. And they kept pressing until their change came. It did not come immediately. It did not come without some bondage. But they knew that if they placed their trust in a higher power, in the midst of those dark midnight drives down dusty roads, that God will come and see about them. I wish you all a good day. Each time that we gather together, we do so remembering those freedom rides, because they didn't simply ride on the bus and be silent, but they eased the tension by singing freedom songs. metered hymns, old sacred hymns, just to change the atmosphere of the space. Now, to the casual observer, these songs were merely songs. But to those that were riding on the buses, the lyrics became transposed into life movements, and the ink jumped from ink and paper to living, breathing testimonies. These songs became transformative actions that these freedom riders, many of you who may be here, have undertaken in your own lives. Now, I hope that we do continue to take on this ride for freedom. It is my hope and my prayer that we continue to push towards the beloved community. But I want to take just a moment to sit in the audience of historical record, to gaze at the stand by which we see the brothers by the name of Paul and Silas. Paul and Silas knew their personal liberation was not of themselves, but of the will of God. They felt that obligation to liberate others, so they participate in the liberation of a young woman dealing with physical bondage and demonic possession. They were thrown into prison because of their actions, beaten and bruised by society. To the ordinary person, they should have given up. But the ordinary person did not know they served an extraordinary God who specialized in midnight movements. Paul and Silas decided not to be limited by their circumstances, but they turned the jailhouse into the church house, much like we did in the 60s. They sang their songs and they prayed unto the Lord. And at midnight, many of you know this story, the prisoners, the captives heard them, but most importantly, the Lord heard their cry and shook them free from their physical bondage. Those same songs of liberation that got King through his midnight of death threats. Those same songs of liberation that carried us from the cotton fields to corporate offices. Those same songs of liberation, melodic instruments that helped us through the jail cells in Birmingham, Alabama, are the same songs of liberation that must be taught to carry us in the here and now. So I encourage you on this morning, as you are dealing with bondage in our communities. I encourage you on this morning, as we deal with bondage in our education systems. I encourage you on this day, as we deal with bondage even in our homes, that you find your song. You look back to what got us through. You find your own song of liberation, and you sing it until change comes. You sing your song in such a way that those in captivity cannot help but to hear that song. You sing your song as you deal with hurt and disappointment through a track record of hurts. You sing your song even as you feel bruised and battered. You sing your song as you deal with weights and change and watch God show up in your midnight and bring forth some transformation. Your song may not be somebody else's song, but it is your song. Your testimony may not be somebody else's testimony, but it is your testimony. And you must proclaim and live your testimony, your song so visibly that when the captives see and hear your song translated into action, they are compelled to find their own song and begin the process of liberation. If my father was here, he would tell you this song of liberation, God, go down, great Jehovah. Pilgrim through this barren land, for I am weak, but thou art mighty. Uphold me with thy powerful hand. If that song doesn't work for you, you want to use this song of charge to keep our hand, and a God to glorify, a never dying soul to save, and fitted for the sky to serve the present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh man, all my power is engaged to do my master's will. If that song doesn't work for you, reach back to those freedom lines and you sing your song with great power. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Turn me around. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. And on that great day when the community of the beloved becomes the rule and not the exception, when all of God's children shed the silly labels that divide and not unite, on that great get-up morning, I anticipate the rays of victory illuminating the air of hope. I anticipate us joining together and shall overcome.